Ferencz, Director of the Academic Cooperation Association based here in Brussels, and it is my great pleasure to welcome you this morning to the 2022 edition of ACA's seminar, What's New in Brussels? Recent Developments in European Policies and Programs. The name already says it all. This is our flagship event marking the start of every year since 2004 with a stock-taking exercise on the Brussels talk and walk in higher education, while bringing in the voice of the sector for inspiration and for a thorough reality check. This is the second year and hopefully the last in which the event is taking place fully online, as we look forward to the next opportunity of connecting and of hosting you in person. This year's event seems particularly timely. We're 1 year into the current generation of the Erasmus Plus program, 2021-2027, with many experiences already made and with several novelties brought through the current call for proposals that we'll zoom into today, while for once we're actually not on Zoom. We're also in the first year of life of the first 2 years of life of the 41 European University Alliances selected in the first 2 pilot calls, with interesting stories to tell about the efforts and the ambition put forward in this wider vision. And as the first group of alliances is now preparing for applying for the next round of funding, setting the full rollout of the European Universities Initiative. And we're only 2 weeks since the much-awaited launch of the European Strategy for Universities and the related Council recommendation, striving to cast vision for the future of European higher education and to remove remaining barriers for transnational cooperation. All these developments are reflected in today's and in tomorrow's program. And in a nutshell, we have much ground to cover, an extraordinary lineup of speakers from the European Commission, internationalization funding agencies, higher education institutions, networks, alliances, and researchers. But as always, we have very little time at our disposal. Therefore, without further ado, allow me to already introduce to you the moderator of the first panel, who is Runa Vigdis Gudmarsdottir, who is no stranger to Brussels, as she worked for the Director General for Education and Culture of the European Commission between 2013 and 2017. She joins us, though, today from Reykjavik, Iceland, where she is working as the Director of the Erasmus Plus National Agency within the Icelandic Center for Research, RANIS. Allow us, please, a few seconds for the transition, and I warmly wish you an insightful and an inspiring event.
Thank you very much, Irina, and welcome, dear participants and speakers, to our very first session of ACA's What's New in Brussels 2022. It's a great honor to be moderating our first session, which is, as Irina mentioned, highly relevant. For the next 55 minutes or so, we will be talking about the brand new higher education package, which was announced in the Commission work program for 2022 under the headline Promoting Our European Way of Life. The package includes a new European strategy for universities and also a proposal for a council recommendation on building bridges for effective European higher education cooperation. And it seems that with this package, we now have a framework, a policy framework that brings together different missions of higher education and strategic documents already published by the EU, such as the papers on the European education area, on the European research area, and the Digital Europe Action Plan. And the concept of such a framework is something that ACA has called for and therefore welcomes. As you can see from the position paper that ACA published in September last year. I believe the link will be shared in the chat, so if you haven't had a look already, I recommend that you do so. Today we have with us 3 excellent speakers to elaborate on the new policy package. And today we will talk about how the Commission, or what the Commission, what institutions, and what European countries expect from one another so that the objectives of the higher education policy package can be fulfilled. I'm happy to introduce Sophia Eriksson Watershoot. She is the Director for Youth Education and Erasmus Plus at the European Commission's Directorate General for Education, Sport, Youth Sport and Culture. And she is in charge of European cooperation on higher education, schools and youth policy. And she will tell us some more about the higher education policy package today. I'm also happy to have with us today Ragnhild Sölvi Berg. She is a senior advisor for the Norwegian Directorate for Higher Education, and she represents the Directorate at the Norwegian Cooperation Office for Research, Innovation and Education, NORCOR, in Brussels. And last but not least, we have Dr. Stefan Geifes. He is the director of the Erasmus Plus National Agency for Higher Education within the German Academic Exchange Service, the AAD. And while our speakers are talking, I would like to ask the participants to be active in the chat. We very much would like an interactive session with you and a dialogue with institutions that are here today. So please post your questions or comments in the chat, and I will do my very best to pick them up during our panel discussion. Dear Sophia, without further ado, I will give you the floor. Please, welcome and go ahead.
Thank you so much, Runa, for this introduction. And thanks a lot to Irina and Akka for hosting this these 2 days of, I think, very interesting discussion. So it's a pleasure for me to be here to present to you the main lines of the very recently adopted higher education package. It was adopted by the European Commission on the 18th of January. So this package has 2 parts, and you have mentioned them, Runa. We have a communication that sets out this European strategy for universities, and it is accompanied by a proposal for a council recommendation on effective European higher education cooperation. So I'll use some slides here to take you through the main elements of the strategy. So perhaps the first question one can ask then, why a strategy and why now? Well, as you know, and you are, I think many of you listening in today, you are very much aware Europe is facing major challenges. Clearly, we are going through a big transition, a green transition, a digital transition. And we know we have an aging population, so demographic changes, but also we're going through a major health crisis. So the pandemic, of course, has affected all our societies and economies. So it's clear that our society needs more than ever the contribution of universities. And it's clear also that the higher education sector can have a leading role and can really contribute to this post-pandemic recovery that we are going through, and also contribute strongly to this green and digital transition. So for this, of course, universities, they will need our support. We will need to give them the tools and to give them the power to actually be part of these important transitions. And that's why we need the European strategy. So it's there to help give a common direction and to also join forces between EU level, between member state level, but also, of course, the universities themselves. And perhaps it's important to say as well, the European strategy is a way to also bring light and value to where Europe really has a competitive advantage. It can be, of course, we are, I think, around the globe extremely good in cooperating and really sharing experiences, and just think of our mobility programs like Erasmus Plus, which celebrates 35 years this year, by the way. But we also have a strong tradition of building our education, research, innovation, and service to society built on very strong common values. And last but not least, perhaps we can say that we are the continent in the world that is really good at combining excellence with inclusion. So this is a bit the rationale for why we need a strategy. Now, the European strategy is not a standalone initiative, and it operates, of course, alongside the broader political European agenda. So we have, for example, you can see here on the slide, we have a recent renewed industrial strategy, we have the European Green Deal, we have the digital decade. All these initiatives clearly mean that we have big restructurings of our economy and societies happening. So that is having a strong impact on, broadly speaking, and also, of course, on the higher education sector specifically. We're also living in not only European context, but a global context, and as it looks today, a quite uncertain context. So this obviously also has an impact. But it's important to see also how the strategy brings together already agendas out there. We have recent put on the table last year the European education area, or work towards European education area, and the European research area, the next steps for it. So of course we need to find synergies between these areas, and synergies also what is happening within the Bologna process. So one should also see this European strategy as trying to bring better to or closer together the different parts and the work on these synergies. Now, this work of the strategy is not something that has happened very, let's say, briefly and spontaneously. It has been a very structured co-creation process, and it has been a co-creation process together with clearly with member states, of course, with higher education institutions themselves, a lot of the networks, associations like ACA. So it's also an opportunity for me here to also thank everybody who have been contributing through discussions, debates, position papers, and with their concrete experiences. And this strategy would not have happened without it. So clearly, Commission has tried to facilitate this process and put a bit of a common structure and common direction. So big thanks for that. Now, let's look a bit specifically to how things look like in the higher education sector and the challenges that it is facing. And we can see, as I mentioned, the value of cooperation. It's a long tradition we have in Europe, and it's very valued in terms of how it contributes individually, clearly, but also institutionally with better quality and actually being a trigger for transformation and change. But when we consulted, we saw there are still big obstacles for this cooperation to become a more in-depth cooperation. And we actually, we heard from universities, 92% of them said that they experience such obstacles. We see with the transformation of our societies into a green and digital society and economy, the skills needs are very rapidly evolving. So of course, this is a challenge for the sector to also be up to speed and fit for the future to offer such skills. We also see that a topic which has been discussed in many contexts and for many years, sort of the social dimension of higher education. Unfortunately, we see still there are big challenges, and there unfortunately are still underrepresented groups of those students, academics and researchers that come from a disadvantaged background. And we see that there are still gender gaps. Today, only 20% of higher education institutions are led by women. Then more or challenges that have come more to the forefront recently is also the whole discussion about fundamental academic and democratic values, and many universities experience that they are under real pressure. Looking more at the global challenge, clearly Europe also has a challenge in attracting and actually retaining talents. And that is everything, of course, students, but also broadly speaking on, researchers and broadly speaking on academics. And last but not least, the funding. Here, unfortunately, looking at the data and the situation looks not so good. We see that investments are actually going down in many countries, investment in higher education. And we see that actually half of higher education systems investment is declining. So Let's look then what the European strategy for universities, how it looks like, how it's organized or structured. Well, it tries to combine this broader societal context with the challenges that we see in the higher education sector itself. And it tries to bring all this together into a shared vision that will hopefully serve and be useful to all types of higher education institutions. So we are including here, of course, the research-based universities, but also universities of applied sciences and other higher education institutions. So this is really a strategy for all types of higher education institutions. And of course, as a challenge, but quite new, but the strategy is really trying to bring together all missions of universities. So be it education, research, innovation, but also importantly, the service to society mission. And then trying to put all this into concrete priorities. And of course, from the EU level, we would like to support. So we propose a number of concrete actions. And at the same time, of course, we call and we hope that member states will follow, that they also do their part in supporting higher education institutions. Now, the strategy is structured into 4 key areas. And they try to summarize all, let's say, the broader objectives that I've explained. But perhaps the first and perhaps the most important one is the first objective of strengthening the European dimension in higher education and research. And for that, and we'll come back to that, there are a number of flagship initiatives that will support this strengthened European cooperation. And one should see that really related to the proposal of a council recommendation. Because if we want to have a stronger European cooperation in higher education and research, we cannot do it alone as a European strategy. We really need commitment, strong commitment from member states to make it happen. And that's the role specifically for the council recommendation to work under this objective. And without doubt, this objective is very much inspired by the still recent, but starts to be building on some strong lessons learned now, experience of the European University Initiative. Here we have seen those alliances being born a few years ago, and now they want to take the next step. And the next step means more in-depth transnational cooperation. So that's also what this key objective is trying to cater for. Now, the second key objective is to support universities and really their specific European way of life. And here we can see, as I explained in the beginning, we have a good tradition of really offering higher education for all. Now, more and more discussion is offering offering lifelong learning opportunities for all. So it's a very inclusive approach who can benefit from higher education, and especially in these times of needs of new skills, this is perhaps even more important. And here you will find also actions linked on to fundamental values, and of course to try to push a more inclusive and diverse university student body and research bodies. The third objective here gather different actions that are about the green and the digital transition and the role that universities can play in actually leading through, of course, developing the skills, but also leading in terms of research and innovation potential. And then the fourth objective is about to reinforce universities as drivers on the global scene. So be really a driver for competitiveness. So now, what are the support actions at EU level to reach these objectives and make this vision a reality? And I should say that there are a lot of actions proposed. I think we are up to 50 actions, so I will clearly only mention a few of them, some examples. But I would like to stop a little bit on the 4 so-called flagship initiatives, because the transnational cooperation is the cornerstone of the strategy in itself, because there is a need, as I have explained, but also because it interacts and supports the other objectives of the strategy. So you can see it as a leverage that will help to achieving the rest of the strategy. So of course here we would like to reinforce, but also build on the existing tools and approaches that we have. We have excellent tools for quality assurance, recognition, developed under Bologna and under the EU or in the research area. But it's also important here to see that we need perhaps to go further because of the need of the higher education institutions. And this is what we have named, therefore, the 4 flagship initiatives, to take quite bold actions and try to help and make transnational cooperation a reality. So the first flagship is the full rollout of the European University Initiative. For the moment, we have 41 excellent alliances, but we see that there is potential to increase and to really roll out fully the initiative, also building on this positive experience. So with the reinforced budget of Erasmus Plus for this period, we will be able to do that actually. So the objective is to increase the alliances up to 60 of them, and involving more than 500 higher education institutions. So the timeline being more or less mid-2024 for this. Now, to help these alliances, and I should say not only the alliances, but we see this is clearly a request for many of them, is to start working towards how alliances can act together as a legal entity. And this legal entity would allow many of them actually to perhaps search for funding, but also share different resources, share infrastructure, share resources, be it human resources, and really help them to do that in a simplified manner, because we see that this is of course happening today, but it's not easy. So finding a way of a common or a legal statute that would help alliances to act more commonly and together, we see this is a really important step to a more deep transnational cooperation. Third flagship, it's about also a very important step towards making the alliances work even better, but not only for them, again. It's to work towards a European degree. Now, as a European degree does not mean that we are accrediting or bringing this to the European level. That's not at all what is meant by it. A European degree will still be delivered at national level. But the idea is, of course, to give some recognition to the institutions that have worked very closely together, and also to students to have a symbolic value. So the European degree, we hope that we will take the first step already by piloting, see if this is feasible. This is where we have to start. But this is an important flagship. And then last but not least is to strengthen the work done already on the European student card, where we have progressed a lot, and we see that this is simplifying learning mobility. Now we want to take it one step further by bringing in a unique European student identifier that will be available gradually for first mobile student and then also more broadly to other students. So perhaps I told you I will not go through the different actions. There are many of them, but perhaps I give you a few examples of what I think could be interesting to highlight on the other 3 objectives. I would like to mention under the second objective. Here we see a need to look at career frameworks. And there I mean the comprehensive view of career frameworks. We know there is a lot of discussion already under the ERA and the research career frameworks, but we lack a more comprehensive view. So this is one action we would like to bring forward already next year, to bring forward a European framework for attractive and sustainable careers in higher education. Of course, always co-created with institutions and as a voluntary framework. Similarly, on the diversity and inclusion priority, to push a little bit action here, because we see not so much, there is progress, but perhaps not as quick as we all have hoped for. And part of it is perhaps to learn from each other, provide better peer learning. And again, we would like to offer here, facilitate this process by bringing forward another framework on inclusion and diversity that will help universities to design their strategies and perhaps bring in incentives to make progress. When it comes to the democratic and academic values, we have many tools to our disposal, actually, and one of them I can mention are of course, the charter of the Erasmus Charter for Higher Education and the new Erasmus Student Charter. These are tools that are important to make mobility happen. And here we would like to monitor them and include them, first of all, these fundamental rights as a strong part, and being able to really monitor or reinforce the monitoring of them. When it comes to the green and digital transition, there are a lot of activities there. We have only also earlier in January, we put forward a recommendation that really focus on the green transition. It's on higher education and on school education. But there we see there is a strong message about the whole school or the whole university approach. So this whole institutional approaches is a way that we would like to support universities in their leading role in the green transition. On the EU's global role and leadership, clearly there's a lot to say. There is a role, of course, as EU as projecting its soft power in this way, but is also an important role of EU being able to be competitive on the global scene. And for this, we propose to work more closely in the so-called Team Europe approach, to really join forces again between member states, because stronger we are stronger together, and try to bring to make more visible this positive experience. So this Team Europe can really strengthen also member states' individual actions on the global scene. So how do we make this strategy a reality? Well, first of all, we cannot do it alone, and this strategy has a number of actions for EU level, but there's also a strong call for member state action. And there's actually a specific a list of actions that we hope member states will embrace and take forward. And I should say that they are spelled out more in operational detail in this council recommendation. So this is part of making the strategy a reality. But it doesn't stop there. The strategy will not happen if we are not having the right financial mechanism and the financial support. Luckily, we have a very strong new multi-annual financial framework, so different programs that can support universities, not only Erasmus Plus and Horizon Europe, but we have other instruments and programs that are really powerful. And of course, we have the new Next Generation EU, so the Recovery and Resilience Facility can really also bring in additional incentives. And all in all, we have estimated that universities can benefit these 7 years from around 80 billion euros, which is a lot of potential that we need to use to the best. Secondly, of course, the strategy in itself sets a vision, but we also need to monitor and see the progress. So for that purpose, we are proposing to establish a European higher education sector observatory, with the objective to try to monitor different parts of the strategy, where we're going. Of course, we're not starting from scratch, because we have a number of excellent tools that we will build on and make perhaps a more efficient use of these tools. So bringing them all in one place in this observatory. And a last point to make is the whole world of synergies. It's something we talk a lot about, but I think the strategy will now allow us to make it happen, to turn those talks into action, so to say. And I think we've had discussions clearly in the framework of our European education area, in the research area, but also in the Bologna context. So I think that all the elements are there. Now it's a matter of course, willingness, but also being concrete. What are the mechanisms or the structures we will establish or work on to make it happen? And we have what we propose, and I think that has been also clear from the start of this discussion. We are not introducing new governance for this. We are talking about using the existing governance, but keeping things flexible and really fit for purpose. So with that, I think I've covered the main elements and looking forward to the discussion.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Sophia. You have given us a very comprehensive overview, and we have a lot to think about. There are already questions coming in, and I look forward to having the discussion in a moment. Sophia, you did mention, and you very much highlighted the role of universities in the post-pandemic recovery of Europe, which is crucial. But you also stressed the co-creation element of the strategy, and the need to work in a Team Europe approach together with the member states. So I'm very interested now in hearing what our other speakers have to say. Ragnhild and Stefan, we will start with you, Ragnhild. Is your initial reaction to the strategy? And have you had any feedback from Norway?
Thank you, Runa. Is it on? Okay. Thank you so much, Runa, and thank you to Akka for inviting me to also share my thoughts on the strategy and on the education package. I think first of all, what I want to say is I think it's really great that the Commission issues now a strategy that puts synergies between research, innovation, and higher education high on the agenda. I think higher education institutions, of course, they serve several functions, and it makes a lot of sense to see these in connection with each other rather than in separate silos. Even though we could perhaps have wished for even more jointness and more synergies, this is really an important signal from the Commission. So that's my first point. And I think we are also very glad to see that the EU is working on facilitating the collaboration cross borders and attacking the remaining barriers, as Sophia outlined. And I wanted to comment really on the first of the four objectives, the new framework for enhancing European cooperation first. So I think the actions within are very ambitious, which is really good. And I think, or I know that we are very interested in seeing the results of these exploratory actions regarding the European degrees and the legal statute. There will be a separate discussion on this topic tomorrow, so I won't go very detailed into my comment here. But I wanted to mention that I actually do miss a reference in the document regarding the European degrees to the at least 18 years or so of experience that we have within the Commission programs, right? In Erasmus Mundus with the joint master's and doctorate degrees, and then the joint doctorates and Marie Skłodowska career actions. I think European higher education institutions, as well as other stakeholders, have a lot of experience from these, on both good and on bad, and that could be very useful in this exercise. And I think also it's important for us as national level actors that the new initiatives are not developed as parallel structure to already existing structures or tools developed through the Bologna process, which I'm very glad to hear Sophia also mentioning in her speech. I have to say I'm also missing a bit more reference to other cooperation projects and tools available in Erasmus Plus outside of the European University Alliances. Erasmus Plus is much more than student mobility and European University Alliances. The alliances, of course, are very important and very high on the agenda at the moment, but the vast majority of higher education institutions in Europe are not part of a university alliance, and they will not be so, even by 2025. And I think that a strategy that should discuss the future of universities in Europe should also promote cross-border collaboration beyond the European university alliances. And we know that these bottom-up projects, for instance, the knowledge alliances, now innovation alliances, cooperation projects, strategic partnerships, etc., also play a very important role in building international networks, test out and carry out innovations, and in contributing to all of the objectives that this very strategy is highlighting. The university alliances have a lot of transformational potential, also because they engage the leadership at the institutions. And this is brilliant, I think. But I think I would also challenge the leaderships to encourage employees to explore the rest of the Erasmus Plus program, to encourage the partnerships with researchers and lecturers within or without the university alliances based on their common academic interest. And from the Norwegian context, at least, we see that some of the most successful higher education institutions in developing and carrying out successful Erasmus Plus projects are where the leadership actually gives resources and recognition to the researchers involved in this kind of work. My final comment is a small one regarding the fourth of the pillars, regarding the global cooperation and the drivers of the EU global role and leadership. I'm very glad to see this topic in the strategy, and especially the topic of recognition of third country qualifications, that it's addressed, because this, we know, is a major barrier for mobility with countries outside of the EU and the Schengen areas. Specifically using Erasmus Mundus to address global challenges is both pertinent and very interesting. However, I'm a little bit concerned about the wording that is used here, and talking about the EU's global role and leadership. I think the learning potential for European stakeholders is a bit missing in how this is phrased. Yes, Europe is leading on many things, but I do think we should also be humble enough to recognize that we as a region and as sectors, we have things to learn also from others, right, beyond our own region. I studied social anthropology, and one of the main lessons we learned there was that when actually meeting others, we would also be more aware of our own way of life and our strengths and our weaknesses. And this, I think, could perhaps have been more highlighted in this strategy. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ragnhild. Before we give Sophia the opportunity to react to your feedback, we will now turn to Germany, to you, Stefan. Could you please share with us what you think about the new strategy, and has it been successful in pinpointing the priorities that are relevant in your view?
Yes, with pleasure, Runa. Thank you very much, dear Sophia, for your presentation of the Commission strategy for universities. As Ragnhild, I do welcome the initiative and thank the Commission not only for taking up the important subject for the future of universities in our society, but also for the timing of the strategy. We are facing, you said it, Sophia, challenging times. Climate change threats our planet, and a worldwide pandemic threats our social interaction. Universities, as central places for education, research, and innovation, have a lot to contribute to overcoming these challenges. The Commission's strategy addresses them in the second and third pillar, on which I will focus, as Ragnhild had commented on the first and the fourth pillar. So the second pillar is, to remember it, the support of universities as lighthouses of the European way of life. European universities, as we know them today, have been invented in Europe. They are essential for our societies, our European way of life. The strategy addresses this via the skills transmission, diversity and inclusion, and fundamental values. All this is right. Nevertheless, research, the transmission of its results through education, and its use via innovation is what universities are standing for. This aspect could have been elaborated a little bit more in the strategy. And research is not only done in research universities, but also in University of Applied Sciences, and plays a bigger role there. Furthermore, higher education institutions are also looking for more synergies between the Erasmus Plus and the Horizon Europe program. Idealiter, they wish and they looking for common calls of both programs with similar logics of administration. Let me come to the third pillar, to empower universities as actors of change in the twin green and digital transition. Universities contribute to these ways in three ways to the green and digital transition. First, by getting more green and digital in their work and functioning. Second, by teaching necessary new skills related to these transitions. And third, universities are playing an essential role in understanding the climate change and by designing digital solutions. They do so once again by research, which has to be highlighted too. The strategy gives the university a central role in the future of our society. This is very important. They have this potential because of the specific nature as place for research and teaching. This is something we should not forget while we make them contributing to the benefits of our society. So this would be my first reaction to the strategy on an overall level. We can come back on details more in the discussion. Thank you.
Many thanks, Stefan. Let's start with this point that you raised, synergies between research and education, between Horizon and Erasmus+. This also links with a comment that we had, a question that came in from a participant who is asking about the higher education career framework. How does the Commission see the link with the researcher career framework under ERA, and how will the Commission, with member states, make sure that a holistic view is developed on academic careers rather than having separate frameworks for contributions of academics to different university missions? Sophia, I think it's an interesting question, and I would very much like you to react to the question on synergies and if the strategy is also doing enough to support us in creating synergies between the two missions. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much. Very interesting remarks from Ragnhild and Stefan. And thanks for also the comment that comes from the audience, or the virtual audience. So a lot of topics, but I will focus then what you suggest, Runa, on the synergies. I think there, of course, the strategy in a way it's not the starting point, but it's the strategic vision where we want to go with these synergies. So this is really for the first time putting this all into action. I can put it like that. It has to be seen as synergies on the policy side, but also, of course, as you mentioned, on the program side. Because we know that we have, if we have a strong message, we know the direction where we want to go. Also, when it comes to synergies, we have to make our instruments being mobilized and also move in that direction. I think that's perhaps an important point to make in the beginning. How to make it happen? As I mentioned, we have to continue the approach that we have always been doing with the strategy, because we don't have the perfect recipe. We don't sit in the Commission with a secret book where all of this is clearly said. We reflect what we have heard from stakeholders. We try to bring our facilitating role here. But we have to rely also on the existing entities that we have, be it from the Bologna side, be it on the ERA side or the EA side. And we have to trust the process. I think this is when it comes to the policy and the direction. When it comes to the programs, we have some excellent and reinforced instruments thanks to this new MFF, and we have them now for the next, we've gone through the first year, so we have another 6 years in front of us. We have, of course, made an effort in trying to build in potential synergies, both I'm taking here the example of Erasmus Plus and Horizon Europe. But of course, we cannot be blind that they also have their own separate intervention logics. They have their own objectives, and sometimes they create also constraints for synergies. But I think there is still a possibility to find a balance that will also serve, let's say, the sector here, the higher education sector, and that they can see that it's simple. It should not be complicated to benefit from either of the program. Of course, the European University Alliances is a good example, because we already shown that we provided, of course, the kickstart here with Erasmus+, but we also saw that Horizon Europe quickly came after and complemented the funding. But of course, we need to see if the expectations are fully right. I'm not sure if we have two legal bases, two regulations with very specific rules in each case. I don't know if the legislators, and here we are talking about what was decided by both member states and the European Parliament, if they had the intention to really do, one application that will cater for both programs. I'm not sure this is exactly possible. But we should look at that. I totally agree with that. But we have the constraints of the underlying rules. I think the comment on the career framework is important. Also, as you said, it links to the synergies. I think it's important to say that we want to really, when we say synergies, it doesn't mean that we have to do everything at the same time. because we know that the research career framework, that is something that is ongoing since quite some time under the era. Now we want to bring a more broader and holistic approach to academic careers, but we cannot pretend that we are going to simply merge everything. So we have to see it as the objective being to give more attention in this case to perhaps the non-research part of the careers, and try to bring it as closely as possible together with all the progress that has been done on the research career files, and then see if we can achieve a more holistic approach, how we look at the value of academic careers and perhaps the value in between teaching, research, and other more outreach activities. So it's the synergies is really bringing things together without necessarily saying we have to do the perfect timetable, everything at the same time, and we don't need to do one document of everything. So I hope that clarifies a bit.
Thank you very much, Sophia. One aspect that was stressed also before in our discussion, and especially by Ragnhild, was the concept of the European way of life. And the learning process. I wondered if, Sophia, you could elaborate a little bit on the idea behind, and if you think the strategy has taken into account sufficiently enough that learning is a two-way process.
I suppose you mean this in a global context. Yes. Yes, I mean, of course, there's a choice of attention, and we have so much to offer and to say. And I think Ragnhild is right, by the way. We could have made a lot of valorization of previous experience of the Erasmus Mundus, the MSc, and so on. Of course, it's a choice in the end of finding the right length and focus on the strategy. But having said that, of course, we valorize all this experience, and we valorize, of course, the role of other partnerships and cooperation that we have certainly under Erasmus+. When it comes to the learning process, I think the point here was to really, maybe we are not so often talking about our own strengths. And I think that's the purpose of this second objective, that we have a European way of life, but we don't talk so much about it. And maybe we are a little bit too modest, I would say, because we are celebrating 35 years of Erasmus+. We have a European higher education area through the Bologna for more than 20 years. We've done an enormous progress. I think we are so strong in this cooperation that we do together. And we are so strong also in giving access to higher education to let's say, a broad part of our society, comparatively to the rest of the world. Always we can still improve, and that's clear. And we have this, I think we can label ourselves as being really the front runner here, and a bit of a global leader of combining excellence and inclusion. So the purpose of this key objective is that let's bring value in that, and let's also be proud of that. And we have some strong European values that are underneath. That, of course, does not mean that we cannot improve and that we cannot learn from other good experience, and certainly from a global level. But it's a matter of how you emphasize, and if, of course, you could put emphasis on everything all the time. But I think here is it's a strong political message that let's also benefit from this experience that we've done together, and we can be stronger together in that when we valorizing it. But of course, we fully agree. I think we all know we can improve and learn from good outside experiences.
Thank you. I think the strategy is quite clear in the sense that there are some measures that the European Commission has to take, and then there are some measures that the member states have to take, and sometimes there are tensions between the two. There was a comment from a participant that touched upon this issue. They ask, how can or will the Commission help or support member state governments to overcome conflicting national legislation in realizing these objectives and operationalize the initiatives? There is the European approach, a valuable step ahead, but still not solving issues with national legislation. What can be done in addition? And here, Stefan, I would like some comments from you on this. Do you agree that this is an issue that needs to be tackled? Could the strategy have done more? You come from Germany, which has maybe an added complexity because of the autonomy between the different Länder. So what are your thoughts on this?
I think the initiative by itself of the legal status and the degree is very good to help the universities to go further in their cooperation. Nevertheless, I'm not quite sure that all universities want to go this way. So it should be clear that it's a suggestion, a possibility to do, but it is not that they do not have to do. I imagine some very proud old universities, not only in Germany but also in the other countries, who want to stay to their diploma, to their degree. And the second point is, it's a question of marketing and policy setting and reality. You said, Sophia, of course, it will be not a degree given by the European Commission. It will be a degree of the universities, and then we give something in addition. To make it strong, you call it a degree. But is it really a degree, or should we find another wording which is more appropriate to underline the added value without putting a word which perhaps can produce some reactions who want to defend a degree, and then we come into a discussion which is not necessary, because there won't be a degree given by the European Commission. And why do we have to talk about this if we? I have no idea, unfortunately, how we could rename it, but something that underlines the value, the European way, without going into this nitty-gritty of the denomination. This is a discussion I've heard a lot in Germany, although the strategy is welcome, of course.
Sophia, any thoughts on this?
Yes, no, thanks for bringing this up. And I think as the 2 days go by, you will come back to this topic quite a lot, I understand. But Stefan, you mentioned something important, and it allows me to clarify. First of all, the terminology here. You are right, European degree. This is a vision. This is where we think we want to go. And it's something that we hear also especially from students themselves. They want to have something concrete, and for them, that means a degree. Now, what we are proposing is not to put immediately tomorrow a degree on the table. It's really, we're proposing a pathway towards such degree. And we hope we can get there. We don't know yet, but we hope we can get there. So as we propose, we are looking into different steps. And the first steps is to actually let's test something. And what we understood could be interesting to test is we try to define what is this European, what is the specifics, what are the criteria that could be the underlying criteria for what such a European degree may look like, what it should contain. So this is the discussion that we need to have and that we have not had. But once we have those criteria, of course, you can imagine that you can apply it as a complementary certificate, perhaps is the right way, or a label, to call it something else. That could be a first step. Based on that experience, of course, the pathway can continue if this is what is feasible and what universities and member states want to go. That could, of course, nothing excludes that we can go further to a European degree. So we have to see it in this stepwise approach. And also important what you highlight, this is not an obligation. This is really to respond to, I would say, some vocal needs for this degree. And of course, it's voluntary. even the testing, of course, voluntary. And I think beyond that would also be voluntary. So thanks for making that distinction.
Thank you. Ragnhild, if we stick to the topic of joint degrees, whatever we will call them, you mentioned in your intervention the need to build on experiences already made, to both the good and the bad ones, and this is also what AKA has called for in the area of science diplomacy. You mentioned Erasmus Mundus, Ragnhild. Very briefly, what can we learn from all the experience we have made with that program?
Yes, now first and foremost, I think in Erasmus Mundus, there have been a lot of experience and experiments on delivering joint degrees. Is it possible? Should it be joint programs? Do we need a label? What should we call it? How should we do it? And especially, how is this being made possible both by the national legislations, the different national legislations, and the universities' autonomy and the universities' practices? So I think all of this, there is a very rich experience here that deserves to have a relook. And I think there are, several reports, etc., already done. But I think bringing the European degree on the agenda, as it is done in the strategy, also invites the countries to have a second look, or a third or a fifth look, on their own legislations and how these kind of jointly delivered degrees are possible or not in their own legislations. What are the barriers, etc.? How are we doing on the implementation of the Bologna tools, the European approach to joint degrees, etc.? So I think it's welcome that this topic is now back on the agenda. So that's really good. Yeah.
Thank you. Well, we're approaching soon the end of our session. We have a bit less than 5 minutes left. And a final question that has come in from the audience has to do with the UK, and it is for you, Sophia. How can the potential of Pillar 4, the fourth pillar, be harnessed for keeping UK-EU academic cooperation at their best level despite Brexit and UK withdrawal from the Erasmus+? There is also a reference to the association of UK to Horizon, which has not been solved. Would you like to briefly comment on this, Sophia?
Well, I can briefly say that. First comment, I really want to make that we are still regretting so much that the UK took the decision about not joining Erasmus+. This is really so disruptive for not only the UK but also many universities in Europe. I think this was really a pity, and we are still hoping that they would come back to the negotiation table. Having said that, our international objective in the strategy is an open one. It's not targeting certain countries. So, but of course, the global context is absolutely essential for the whole higher education sector. So there is, of course, a lot of possible cooperation and interaction that can happen, be it UK or other countries. So there is the cooperation will continue. But we know, of course, being in a certain instrument accelerates and intensifies the cooperation. And this we cannot have, unfortunately. And I think we are many regretting that. Thank you.
So a final question for all of you. After having, Ragnhild and Stefan, after having read the strategy, you both work for national funding agencies. Stefan, you're the director of an Erasmus Plus national agency. What would you say to all the institutions that are with us this morning and are thinking about applying to Erasmus Plus or other EU programs? What is the main message for them in view of the new strategy for applicants? Can we start with you, Ragnhild?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for the question. Yes, so my message would would be to go for it, to go for the opportunities in the program, of course, but look not only at European universities, look also at the rich variety of actions that are proposed in the current call and the coming calls, etc. Yes, and make the best out of it.
Thank you, Ragnhild. Stefan, one sentence.
My message is the same. Use the new opportunities. We had a tough year behind us. 2021 was not easy, but we did it. The higher education institutions did it. We, the national agency, did it. The European Commission did it. So now we start this year, 25th anniversary, and we use the novelties to celebrate this.
Sophia, final words. Very few, I'm afraid.
Yes, I couldn't agree more than with what Ragnhild and Stefan have already said. I can only say that I think the European strategy, we hope this is a trigger for not only debate and discussion, but also for action, and also for taking those opportunities that are certainly in the Erasmus Plus program, which I know best. And Ragnhild rightly points it out, there are so many opportunities. There's a whole menu opportunities, and there are choices of being less ambitious or very ambitious in how we cooperate. So the opportunities are there. There are a lot of advice that we can all provide in different contexts. And Stefan, of course, being on the ground, and you yourself, Runa, I think there are only things to gain here. And I hope that we can come back with some excellent experiences once these opportunities have been taken. Thank you.
Wonderful final words for our session, which has now ended, but ACA What's New in Brussels is just starting. Please stay tuned for the next session, which will be on Erasmus Plus, on European Universities Initiative. I warmly thank the speakers today, Sophia, Ragnhild, and Stefan, and also the participants for being with us this morning and to raise their questions and concerns in the chat. Thank you all. Have wonderful 2 days ahead, and goodbye.
Now it's time to move into a more focused discussion around the European University alliances. And now it's my great pleasure to welcome both the virtual audience and the panelists who are physically present here. It's very enjoyable to have a face-to-face encounter like this. Vanessa de Biasanton, you are head of unit responsible for higher education at the European Commission at DG Education, Youth, Sports and Culture. And you have previously also worked at DG Research and Innovation. Now your unit is responsible for the European University Initiative, which has been very much on the agenda during the last week, both in the French presidency event and last week in the European University Alliance event, and now here today. Welcome. From Ghent University, Jeroen Huisman, Professor of Higher Education at the Center for Higher Education Governance. And your research interests are very topical, also relate to organizational change, diversity, policy, and internationalization. It's very nice to have you here bringing in the researcher perspective on this issue. and Anne-Maj Jansen, currently Secretary General for the Aurora Network, which is an alliance of 11 engaged universities, and which was already created in 2016, which puts you in an optimal position of looking into how the alliances have influenced previously existing strategic partnerships, which is also very important. So warmly welcome. And I am Annika Sundbeck, currently on study leave from the Finnish National Agency for Education, EDUFI. And during the last 1.5 years, I had the great joy of participating in several assessments and evaluations related to university alliances, most recently an initiative by the Czech National Agency. And on top of this, I'm also currently a student of University of Helsinki, which is part of Una Europa. So I have this insider student perspective that I can bring to the panel. So today we will look into the state of play of the European University Initiative, the current call, its priorities and links to the strategic aims of the Commission. Also looking at transformations already maybe taken place, unforeseen challenges, and the way forward. Why is this important? Well, at least during the 2 last years, I think that we have seen an unprecedented engagement of higher education institutions across Europe in the alliances. And these activities are very complex, resource intensive, demanding, and time consuming. But there is still this very strong commitment. And the European University Initiative has also brought a momentum of and a culture of living through change. So there is already change happening in national legislation and in institutional praxis. And these alliances are really pushing the transnational knowledge creation and interinstitutional integration into a new level, actually affecting all aspects of the process of arranging higher education. So ranging both from governance to quality assurance, digitalization, administrative structures, support structures, curriculum methodology, lifelong learning, engaging with non-academic actors, etc. Many questions also emerge, and some of them we have the opportunity to discuss today. So with only 5% of the European higher education institutions currently being involved in the initiative, and maybe reaching 10% after the current call, how can these experiences and good practice and modern processes be disseminated? And what is the effect on the larger, wide higher education sector in Europe? This is a very urgent question. Because otherwise there is a risk of creating an even increasing divide between the more forward-looking and maybe less advantaged institutions. And how can staff be motivated in the long run? So how to keep the focus really on the academic inspiration, the innovation, and minimize the administrative burden of integration of institutions. And what about the role of alliances in terms of global partnerships, which was already discussed earlier on? So the alliances are working on solving societal challenges, but many of these are global challenges. So what is the role in terms of reaching aim 4 of the strategy for the alliances? And what can be learned from research on failure or success of strategic alliances? So we will continue with these questions, but first I give the word to Vanessa to give a brief overview of the current call and its priorities. And after that, we will have a few questions to the panelists, and then we open the floor also for the audience. So I warmly welcome, like in the previous session, your questions, critical and constructive. So please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. A real pleasure to be with all of you this morning. So I will give you a little bit of an update of where we are with this initiative. I hope everybody can see the slides online. So I will start with the Council conclusions that have been adopted last year by all the ministers on this initiative. And I think it's very important that the Council confirmed the concept of the European universities as it has been established now for 3 years. And they really believe, actually, so not only there is an enthusiasm from the sector, but there is also an enthusiasm from the ministers. And it was confirmed last year, and it was confirmed also last week when they met and discussed the strategy. So I think that's very good news for all of you that are engaged in this initiative, that your ministries are also there to support you. They consider these alliances, the existing ones and the future ones, as role models for the transformation of higher education towards the strategy that Sophia just presented before. A very important objective for them, and why they see this initiative very important, is the balance between inclusion and excellence. In the past years, there was a tendency to oppose both, but we believe, and the ministers believe, that this should be a common objective, and that these alliances of higher education institutions can pave the way and show how to do it. They reconfirmed the importance of the synergies, and you mentioned it before, between all the missions of the universities in terms of education, research, and innovation. The importance of the geographical balance, because we need to keep in mind that the objective of this initiative is really to bring Europeans together from all parts of Europe. And it's important that this initiative is open to the wide diversity of higher education institutions in Europe. And I think it's important to always remind and keep that in mind, what is the overall objective of what we want to achieve. And sometimes I hear the Commission want to impose. No, it's not the Commission who wants to impose. It's really a mandate that we receive from all the ministers, and the Commission is only the facilitator to implement these wider political objectives. Institutional autonomy and academic freedom are obviously extremely important. They need to be promoted and protected. And they reaffirmed as well the need for sustainable funding for European universities. So based on these Council conclusions, we have presented a call end of last year. I will present the timeline in a moment. So this is really based on this political mandate that has been given to us. And you will see that this call is very much in the continuation of what has been done before. So, as I said before, the key objective for the ministers, but also when we discussed with the wide higher education sector, is to really promote a European identity and a sense of European belonging. Hence, this importance of the geographical balance of bringing higher education institutions from north, south, east, west of Europe, with the objective, as Sophia mentioned before, to put in place long-term strategies covering all the missions of universities. And by putting their strengths together, they will become more competitive and attractive on the global scene. So we're looking at a whole institutional approach, much deeper cooperation, covering all the missions. To do what? Very concretely, to establish European inter-university campuses covering all levels, to facilitate more personalized learning of a wider range of students, to put in place innovative pedagogies, to develop all these green digital skills, but also these transdisciplinary approaches. That is something that is essential for the jobs of tomorrow. When we discuss with the employers, we don't know yet all the future jobs, what they will look like, but they know that this transdisciplinary approach is absolutely key. To have students from different disciplines, different countries, working together with the innovation ecosystem to work on global challenges. And then, very important as well, we want these alliances to provide much more opportunities for students and staff for seamless mobility. So Now, how do we want to further promote and support the European universities that are arriving at the end of their first 3 years? So that is the objective of this call that was launched end of last year. These European universities, those that are arriving at the end of the first 3 years, come at a very turning point. They've tested different joint modules, different joint programs, different joint R&I activities. But now it's the moment to mainstream them across the institutions, across the faculties, across the departments, so that a large majority of their students and staff can benefit. And for that, they need financial support and policy support. This call is to provide the financial support. I'll come to the policy support in a moment. So the objective is to provide sustainable funding to the existing alliances. We have the novelty is that we open up the possibility to have associated partners, not only from the Erasmus Plus countries, but also beyond and to all Bologna countries. So that's the novelty, while keeping the concept. And as you said, and as Sophia explained before, our objective with this initiative is to be as inclusive as possible and to expand to 10% of higher education institutions to be able to benefit from it. And this can be done in two ways, through new alliances, but also by offering the possibility to join existing alliances. So that is why we are launching this call in 2022 for existing ones, but also new ones. And we will repeat the same next year with those that will come to an end of their 3 years next year, plus the possibility for new ones. And in 2024, a new call for completely new alliances. And this is how we intend to achieve these 60 European universities involving 500 higher education institutions through these 3 calls. Now, funding is important to achieve these ambitious objectives. So here you can see that from the 5 million euro that they could get for 3 years, now they can get a much higher funding for the next 4 years. And we give the possibility for those existing alliances who wish so to expand. It's their choice. But if they make that choice, they need additional support, and this is what is provided there. So that is the planning. Now they have until end of March to put forward a proposal, and with the expectation that they can start this autumn. Now we have heard the European universities that funding is essential, but policy support from their member states is also very much necessary. And here, some of the challenges that they are facing are listed, and I'm sure Anna Maria will complement on that. So very important to support them and to ask member states to support them. For example, I'll take the first challenge when it comes to implementing joint programs. At the moment, and Ragnhild mentioned it before, through Erasmus Mundus, there is a lot of experience, and it's not easy to put in place a joint program already between 2 or 3 universities. So imagine now that our objective is to have joint degrees between 7 or even 9 universities, which is even more complex when you look at the diversity of higher education systems. So that is why we have put forward a number of recommendations to the member states to move towards an institutionalized approach to external quality assurance, so that a university is accredited for all their programs, not only program by program, because we ask these alliances to put forward many joint programs, not only one Erasmus Mundus joint program, but many. So that is why it is important to build on the past experiences and go in that direction. And for those countries where they are not ready yet to move towards this institutional approach, the idea is to implement the Bologna tools, such as the European approach to micro-credentials. But it's very important as well, and what we heard from the European universities was that they need recognition for the students of the fantastic education and training opportunities that their universities are providing. And for that is the idea of this joint European degree, which is fully voluntary. It's the choice of the universities, nothing is imposed. But the idea is to recognize the value of this excellent and inclusive training for the employers and for the students. And Sophia has explained before, the idea is to propose it in a step-by-step approach, developing together the European criteria attached to them before it becomes a degree. Now, we are proposing as well to work towards a legal statute. Again, it's a new instrument that we want to propose. Again, it's on a voluntary basis. It's up to the universities whether they need it or not. But we know that some of them need it. And it's important. It's important to provide the tools to the European universities and other alliances to deliver on these ambitious commitments. And that's the objective. We want to implement, to develop it step by step. It's important that we do it together, and to provide the means to the European universities and not any other types of alliances to succeed. It's important to see that these European universities are paving the way. They are triggering needs, putting forward challenges, and then together we try to bring solutions that can be applied not only through the European universities, but any kind of alliance of higher education institutions. And I would stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vanessa. And I think it's a very wise move from the Commission, obviously, now to really try to get the ministries on board and with the Council recommendation, because we know from previous experiences and that many of the obstacles that remain are actually on national level still. But let's move now to hear some experience from an alliance. So I turn to Anne-Mai and would ask you to share with us a little bit some status of progress of your alliance, and what are the positive experiences that you have had, and maybe some unforeseen challenges, maybe not repeating so much what we have said already, but and also really some kind of reflection of whether this experience has matched your expectations.
Thank you very much, Annika, and thank you for moderating today's session, and thank you to Akka for the invitation. I'm delighted to be here. When you posed the question, I was like, oh my God, what am I going to dive into? There's so much. I would say, other than the obvious ones, that COVID is a massive hurdle, not just in terms of mobility, but also in terms of task teams working together.
Oh, microphone.
Sorry, apologies. Yes. So that COVID is a big hurdle in terms of... is it off? And now, is this better? Yeah? Okay, wonderful. I'll start over. Apologies.
This hybrid is a real challenge. We're also used to digital.
Yes, exactly. We're all trying to manage. I only just said thank you for the invitation. And when the question was posed, I was wondering, oh my God, what do I dive into? COVID is a massive challenge, not just in terms of mobility, but also in terms of task teams working together, of course. But those are the obvious ones. Everyone's struggling with them. Looking at our own alliance, I would say you can look at it in a sort of overarching perspective, and then it boils down to pretty much that those activities that are specific, well-defined, everyone knows what they're working towards, don't have too much changes in routines and processes in universities. Those are the easy ones. Easy is an exaggeration, but those are the things that are thriving and going well. Those plans that we have and activities that require a lot of streamlining within universities, that require a lot of processes to be tailored and changed, those are the really challenging bits. And of course, you know this, but when reality comes around the corner, it's quite a different story. I'll give you a couple examples of both. For the easier ones, for example, I'm not saying this was easy, but it's one of the things that we actually did, which we were very proud of, is that we developed and signed last autumn our Aurora MAMA, which is the Multilateral Aurora Mobility Agreement, which is an agreement between all the alliance universities that we have. And also, in addition to that, it includes mobility plans for each individual university. And those are the things that we were, quite proud of and keen to develop, and we're happy. We also have student webinar taster series so that students get acquainted with the universities which they're interested in. We've got a SDG research dashboard, which is a really cool tool where researchers can see how their work is actually being used by policymakers. And we've got an incredible team working on that. We've got our Aurora virtual campus, which is not 100% finished yet, but we hope the website will be up and running soon, and our Aurora Sustainable Campus Action Plan. But as you can imagine, as the names kind of already give away, these are well-defined plans in place that everyone kind of knows what they're working towards. On the other hand, where you have the plans we have for more, really change within institutions in their processes, those are the difficult ones. And unsurprisingly, IT structures is very complex and very difficult, and we need them. We need them to align or be able to work together in some shape or form in order to deliver the deliverables that we said we would. A thing linked to that is a joint course catalogue. How do you do that? How do you make sure that we all agree on this course catalogue as all the universities? And I think a particular thing for Aurora is that we have chosen to go down the path of institutional-wide transformation rather than focusing on one or two big specific projects. And this is incredibly challenging, which is exactly, of course, what the whole idea of the European University is about. But at the same time, it's I can tell you it's a challenging thing. It really needs everyone from academics to senior leadership to be in on this. And I think that's like at the same time the thing I'm very proud of, because if you look at the sheer number of meetings that we have across all levels of our universities, I'm very proud of the dedication that everyone has. We've got task teams meeting regularly, institutional coordinators every month. We've got our rectors and presidents meeting, but it's incredibly intensive. I mean, that asks a lot of dedication and commitment from the people involved. And it's not easy, because everyone is doing this in addition to their jobs and in a high workload environment, which academia always is. So I would say the engagement is a tricky part, but it's also the part that I'm really proud of. And to your second part of the question, does it meet my expectations? On the one hand, yes, because what this initiative has allowed us to do, because as you said, Aurora already exists in 2016. So what this initiative has allowed us to do is to be more ambitious on the things we already wanted to do. We are already working on a lot of these things, and it's completely in line with the vision that we have as Aurora. But at the same time, although when you're working on this that there are some structural things you have to work on which are going to be really complex when you're in the thick of it, it's quite another story. So that is indeed very much the challenge, and you can't know before you start what it really will be like. But yeah, it's I would say a combination of both. On the one hand, yes, it matches my expectations, and on the other hand, it's even more challenging than I thought it would be.
Thank you so much. So what you're saying is that this alliance gives a license for ambition, and I think you pointed to some some features that we have recognized in the assessment. So one is really mainstreaming, as I mentioned in the beginning. So really giving space for the academic innovation and movement, and trying to mainstream the structures and processes and connections and dialogues and meetings as much as possible into the normal traditional, which is probably much more said difficult. And another another aspect also is to try to make all the mobility more flexible in terms of various forms of agreements or fast track initiatives, etc. Now let's move into the researcher perspective, and I turn to Jeroen. So what does research say about sustainability of strategic partnerships? And yes, what is the optimal balance between, in this case, this top-down initiative and a bottom-up motivation of staff? And yeah, what could be some essential pieces of advice to give?
Thank you, Annika, and thanks to Aka for inviting me to this very interesting panel, the only panel that is live here in Brussels. So congratulations to us all. Maybe say a couple of words first on the motivations of universities, organizations to cooperate at an international level. Basically, there are two motives for doing that. Either economies of scale. You have small numbers of students in your program, and you would like to cooperate with other institutions that offer the same program, economies of scales. It's a logical motivation. The other motivation is that the other organizations offer something complementary to your own activities. So there's a surplus value of cooperation. Obvious. I'm stating the obvious, but I think it's important to start there, because actually that second motivation to cooperate, and Anna-Maya was also talking to that issue, is that there are differences between these organizations cooperating. They are embedded in different contexts, and that actually causes problems as well. Because you're so different, it is difficult to cooperate. So there's a paradox, an unavoidable paradox embedded in the idea of transnational cooperation. So how do we see that from research that has been carried out in the last decade or so? I think we can locate the challenges, the problems, barriers at three levels. Let's take the national level first. Stating again the obvious, the audience knows what we're talking about, but it's good to reiterate that. At the national level, the legislation is not always in sync with the legislation in another country. And that is very clear in the area of quality assurance, where institutions are simply not allowed to do certain things because the national legislation stipulates something differently. So the regulation can be a hindrance, absolutely. And in that sense, appreciation for the Commission in the strategy, really to a wake-up call for the national governments to do something about that. At the institutional level, the research points out that it's merely a capacity and capability problem for the management and leadership of these organizations. And we can all relate to that. I think the first time as an institution you engage, you have to sign a contract for a Horizon project, that can be the first time, can be a daunting adventure because, a lot of paperwork, a lot of bureaucracy. Okay, what does this all entail? I think over time we see a gradual adjustment of most of these alliances and partnerships. They have learned how to do that. So that's great. They have professionalized their services, the support services at the institutional level to make this work. Still not perfect, but it cannot be perfect. But there's a growth of understanding to take care that you have these services in place within your institutions. So that's capacity and capability. Another important current in literature is cultural differences between institutions. I'm not so much alluding to national cultures. I think it's much more at the institutional level that there are different motivations of institutions to engage in these partnerships. People want to get different things out of it. Some do it for prestige. Some do it for economic reasons. Not in this case. There's not that much to gain economically, I think, in the short term. But others want to achieve different goals. It's so obvious from the literature that people run into these problems. These problems will be solved as long as you continue to communicate, exchange views, etc. But it is an undercurrent that is important, that there are these differences in motivations. Well, now finally, at the individual level, the research also there points at bureaucracy, researchers and people who want to be involved in Erasmus projects, that they fear the bureaucracy that is involved in that. And also there, again, the different motivations of researchers and teaching staff are potentially barriers to cooperate. Here, I also think we see a gradual movement that once you've been through a couple of these projects, you gain experience, you have more trust in your partners, and cooperation goes more easily. Not without problems, but more easily. I think at these three levels, there are still the barriers, and I hope the audience does recognize this also in their own experiences. Allow me to say then two follow-up things on the initiative. Whereas the initiative, of course, wants to bring about change in the higher education systems, European level. I really liked your phrasing, Annika, license, license for ambition. So I think that's an important objective. At the same time, I have my concerns about the order of things. The initiative is now running, second round, third round, and only now we, including the European Commission, all partners, start to think about solutions that actually should have been implemented much earlier. So the idea about a legal statute, I think it's fascinating, it's interesting. European degree, I'm a little more skeptical. If we have later time, we could talk about that. But my view would have been that these should have been the priorities first to put on the agenda, and then roll out a call for cooperation, transnational cooperation through the European Universities Initiative. Second concern I have about the initiative is that it looks like we want to establish long-term sustainable networks of these universities. My understanding of where we are heading as Europe in a global scale is that we actually need very flexible, loosely coupled systems of organizations working together on small areas. So the idea of very strong connections between a limited set of universities, although they are diverse, sits uneasily, I think, what is needed in Europe that is geared towards innovation, knowledge acquisition, etc. I would opt for a much more flexible approach and actually go back to what we already are doing in a wonderful way, I think, through Horizon program, Erasmus Plus project, etc. So my concerns are there regarding the European University Initiative. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeroen. Lots of thoughts and reflections there. And maybe just a quick question to Vanessa, if you wanted to react on this. I mean, would there have been another way? I mean, we all know that these obstacles existed before the initiative, but would there have been another way to solve this than having the test beds now working with the big alliances and now the council recommendation? I mean, it's not very constructive, but just a quick response to this.
Yeah, no, thanks a lot. And it's a very important point and relevant question indeed. Actually, we have celebrated more than 20 years of the Bologna process, right? And we thought that, okay, should we continue with the Bologna process? Maybe it's the end. Maybe we have done everything possible. And we had put forward already a European degree or legal statute. We had proposed that to the member states before. There was no appetite at all because they didn't see the need. But now when you say, okay, it seems that we have all the tools, let's go, let's launch the European universities. You said more flexibility like Erasmus Plus and Horizon. Indeed, all this exists already. So we are not putting that into question and we are continuing that and it's very much needed. But what we say is that those that are ready to go even beyond, and I loved what you said, Anna Maya, with Aurora, we need to provide the possibility. And that's the objective of this initiative. And what this initiative has shown is that we are not yet ready there with Bologna. We are not yet there. There are still a lot to do. And this is what it shows. And this is what it shows that maybe a joint European degree and maybe a legal statute, and we have 2 years to develop it. So we can agree to disagree now, but and to further develop it during 2 years to make it as relevant as possible to the needs that are expressed by some universities. And again, it's not a solution for everyone, and that's not what we are proposing. But those that want to go for this deeper transnational cooperation, there is a need for such instruments, and this is what we are proposing to develop together.
Thank you so much. I was personally also with a background of working with the Erasmus Mundus for 15 years and so many different projects and and studies and support and guidelines and everything. I have to say I was very glad to see this kind of momentum and this push coming in now. And I would like to again turn back to the alliances and this question about how to keep the motivation of academics and motivation of staff within this alliance, because we know, all of us, that it's very demanding in terms of ambition and aims of integration. So where do you keep the interest, the curiosity of the academics alive in all this structural transformation? And they all, of course, already have some strategic alliances and partners. So what is the balance there? How can you actually just come and tell them, okay, now you have to prioritize somebody else?
No, you definitely cannot. That this is really one of the big challenges that we talk about a lot within our alliance. And of course, the thing is, it's easier said than done, but they have to see the added value for their own work. It has to be intrinsically motivated for them to see, oh, this is what Aurora is offering me. Oh, this is exciting. This is what I want to offer my students. This is good for my research. And once you have them that way, they're sold, they're Auroraized, as we say, they drank the Kool-Aid. But it's the one thing is to get to the level of the academics, because of course we're 9 universities and Aurora isn't, everywhere equally known, and that is one big comms activity that you need to do. But it's not just that, it's also trying to make them see that actually this is of added value for you. This could be beneficial, and this is how it would contribute to your work. You have to let them see that you're actually helping them in their work, either on the education side or on the research side. But that will be one of the things you have to work on for years. That's not easily done overnight.
Yes, I agree, and let's hope that all these academics who have been working with Erasmus Mundus and other joint program could say one day, okay, now we have this quality accredited structure of a European degree, and now we can just freely be innovative within that framework. So I think I will turn back again to Jeroen, and one important thing now is that 2 years has gone, and the Commission is launching an impact study of the alliances, and this is a very important one. And based on a researcher perspective, what would be how could this impact actually be measured? And of course, the challenge here is that there is no baseline information. So an appropriate impact study would look at the situation in the beginning, and then what is the effect of the alliance. But some words or reflections on this from you.
Yeah, I think you said it. This is a challenge. I think particularly in methodological terms. I think it is very good to do a kind of interim stock taking of what is happening in the initiative. That definitely is needed to exchange information as well. My concern is that we can't say anything about impact yet. I think where we are in this stage is that we can map intermediate outcomes. So indeed, Annemai can tell on behalf of Aurora, this is what we have achieved in terms of objectives or processes and even outcomes already. So you may have developed modules for students. You're talking about the virtual space. Yes, that is an achievement, that's an outcome. But the impact question is much more important. How does it impact the students that participate in these kinds of exchange? We can't tell. Let's be honest. It's difficult. Well, what we can do, I think, is to talk indeed to everybody involved in these kinds of networks, what their perceptions have been, what their challenges have been. So I think this is really an opportunity to share good practices, bad practices as well, although people may not be too forthcoming in sharing bad practices, but we have to point at them. So I think what we can do is present plausible storylines about the initiative. We have done this. Our argument is that we should solve this problem. This is how we've done it. And we see these outcomes. And these are our expectations about impacts. that's how I see it for this round of evaluation. I think further down the road, we can be a bit more strict and say, okay, but now we really want to see what you promised in terms of impacts. But let's do a focused analysis of where people are, what they see, what they're doing. And ultimately, I think then for the next phase, I would say we should do a kind of research design that's based on the theory of change. The initiatives had objectives, instruments, facilitators, etc. So you can draw a diagram, connect the dots and say, okay, this is the ultimate outcome and impact. And then in a couple of years' time, we have the opportunity to do a proper impact assessment and see whether the promises have been lived up to. And there we can learn a lot, and also in terms of dissemination of these outcomes. I think I would see these as fairly robust outcomes of an evaluation in a couple of years' time. But for the moment, mapping, sharing, exchanging, I think that should be the main purpose. Don't jump to conclusions on the basis of this interim evaluation.
Exactly. Yes. Thank you so much. Now I have to apologize to the audience. I could not access the questions, but now I can see that there is a question now to all of us, I guess mostly to Vanessa, but about how the Commission could help and support the member state governments to overcome this, sometimes even conflicting national legislations in realizing kind of this transnational knowledge creation. And yeah, there is the European approach. It's valuable, but it's not solving all issues. And we know it has not been implemented in all national legislations. So this is a very crucial question. And unfortunately, we don't have any ministry representatives here, so we can only speculate. But at least you have mentioned that you had a positive initial reaction. So a comment on this question, please.
Yes, thanks a lot. First, I would like to say that I fully agree with you, Jeroen, in terms of we should not jump too quickly in an impact assessment, because as you have seen, the European universities are facing a number of challenges, and it links to your questions. So we need to first to provide the means to the European universities, to develop all these ambitious activities, and the impact will come next. So that's why I think there is a strong call for member states to act now and to support the European universities to develop this ambitious initiative. And I fully agree that what we can now is mapping exactly what you said, and sharing and disseminate. Now, what can the European Commission do to get the support from the member states? Well, that is why on top of the strategy that gives the vision, we have as well proposed recommendations for the member states for more coherence in the higher education systems when it comes to external quality assurance, when it comes to accreditation, when it comes to allowing higher education institutions in the context of transnational cooperation be creative and innovative beyond the national regulations. When it comes, for example, you said that you need interoperability between the IT systems. We mentioned before the transdisciplinary approach. In some countries, it's very regulated. You cannot do, or multilingualism. In some countries, it's very regulated. So these recommendations are for the member states to give more autonomy to the universities in the context, again, of this transnational cooperation, which is a big step. It's a first step, but a first big step on top of the two other instruments that I mentioned before. And we are now debating about it in the context of the Council with all the member states. I can tell you how passionate discussions we have in the Council, which triggers a lot of emotions, but at the same time, excitement that we are working on recommendations that can really be transformative. But of course, we need to find a compromise. What the Commission has proposed is very ambitious, maybe too ambitious for some member states who are trying to water down the recommendations that the Commission has proposed. And that is why I think it's very important that the universities speak to their ministries express their needs if we want to keep the level of ambition that we have proposed. Thank you.
Thank you. I think you point to a very good dimension here, and if you allow me to be a little bit philosophical, I just find it fascinating sometimes to look back at the history of universities and research and science at the time of universitas, when you could go anywhere and you could just, build on your knowledge and you could go back and use it somewhere. And then you had the nation states who came up with maybe a little bit protectionist sometimes legislation and rules and structuring their education systems. So it's very much about trust. We have spoken about trust also previously, and sometimes it seems that there is already existing trust between the institutions who have joined the alliances, but the national quality assurance systems do not really comply, as you mentioned. And I noticed that in the recent EUA event last week, also Vanessa, you mentioned that you are working on updating the Council recommendation for quality assurances, or working on or thinking about, I don't know. But maybe I would be curious to ask if you could elaborate a bit more on that and what the process would be.
Yes, so it's among the proposals that are present in the European Strategy for Universities. So we plan next year to review the Council recommendation on quality assurance that now dates back from 2006. And so things have evolved a lot since 2006, and we need to review it in the light of all the developments for more transnational cooperation, more flexible learning paths. So we need to reflect all this. But of course, quality assurance is very much linked to trust, and we need that if we want to achieve automatic recognition. You know that we have adopted a Council recommendation on automatic recognition of qualifications that has been adopted in 2018. We will have a report this year on where we are in the implementation. We are not there yet. Let's be realistic. And we believe that reviewing this Council recommendation may help in achieving automatic recognition. So that is why we are proposing to move forward on these two fronts to reinforce the trust that is absolutely essential if we want to move towards more flexible instruments.
Jerome, please comment, and then I have another question here from the audience.
Yeah, briefly. I fully agree. I think the essence is trust. I noticed that universities in Europe are very much looking towards the European Commission and to the national legislations to do something. At the same time, I think there must be things that should happen at the level of the institutions. I feel that they are sometimes defensive in the sense, oh, we can't do anything because there's regulation. Oh, the European Commission wants this. I think you and Sophia have also explained that there is variety possible. You're not putting forward a straitjacket, so there are different options. But I also would like to stress that the institutions themselves should do things. You can arrange a lot of things through trust and through contracts as well. People are scared of these kinds of formalizations, but it must be done in the absence of a legal statute, etc. We have to work with contracts. My reflection, not having looked into the literature, is if businesses across the globe can arrange contracts on very difficult topics, very complex topics, on billion-dollar businesses, why can't universities sign a contract and try to achieve what looks like a much more modest objective compared to what businesses across the globe do? So it's philosophical, I know, and it's not an answer to the question, but trust is important, but you can do a lot yourself as institution.
Yes, thank you so much. I want to follow up on that because I have seen that some of the alliances have already developed very impressive and comprehensive agreements, for instance, on accepting each other's internal quality assurance systems, and also really working already on far-going external quality assurance. So they have started thinking about these questions to ask in the impact study as well. So obviously they will be consulted also during the process. But I want to turn also to Anne-Mai to maybe briefly comment on the question on trust, and what have you done in order to increase trust in your alliance, or what kind of quality assurance procedures, if you, yes.
So on the trust issue, Aurora, we've always identified ourselves as a high trust network, even pre-alliance, very much along the lines of, because that's one thing I completely agreed with Jeroen on, we should share our failures and we should share what's not going well, because there's much more to learn there. And I'm hoping all the alliance at some point come to a point where we feel comfortable having those conversations, because we all want to share our shiny new thing. But what's going wrong behind the scenes is equally important, I think, to learn from. But I think, indeed, the trust issue is important. But another thing that kind of played in my mind when this question was asked is that universities are big, structured organizations that do the things the way they've always done it. And this is a pilot. We're trying to figure it out the way we go. And you can, even within Aurora, you can see this bit of a uneasiness of working on something new and exciting and challenging, and the realization that this is a pilot. So you do have the freedom to pilot, to try and to change and to do things differently, while at the same time running into the barriers of institutions. Oh yeah, but this is how we always do it. Yes, but we can let that go now because we're piloting. So that is a tension that you really see, and I'm sure other alliances have it as well. I'm probably not saying anything new here, but yeah, I think that's quite interesting to see. Everyone knows it's a pilot. We have the okay to pilot, but it's uncomfortable at the same time.
Thank you so much. Now, looking a little bit at the Q&A here, I can see there is quite a technical question related to the alliance call, and I'm going to say that tomorrow there will be a session for more technical questions. So I will maybe take the more strategic ones right now, and we are soon also running out of time. But there is one about the current call and opening up to the Bologna countries as associated partners. So is there a particular expectation from the Commission for these partnering institutions and their role in the alliances?
No, absolutely not. It's a fully bottom-up, initiative. So we heard the call from the sector that they would like to enlarge and have the possibility to have associated partners beyond the Erasmus Plus program. So we gave that possibility. Some said, but why not opening up even more for the full partners? But here I would say, when you see that the challenges that universities are already facing within the member states, I think we need to go step by step, because those challenges will be even bigger if with partners, beyond the EU. So we need first to see how deeper we can go within the EU before then opening up further to the Bologna countries. But it's a step in that direction. So that's why.
Thank you so much. Now we have to soon wrap up the discussion, and I really thank you so much. And I wish we could move to another place and continue on a more informal basis. But there is one question also that received many a bit support here, is about how national agencies could support the implementation of European universities. And I would actually now invite all of you to comment on this, I think, very crucial question on how to disseminate the experiences, because it's already been 2 years and we have seen several events, but they have been mainly, of course, digital events, and maybe more like one directional, so with limited interaction and limited really workshop-like activities. So what should be done now in the future to change this situation? Maybe starting with you.
Shall I start? Yeah. I think it's really important to shed light on the opportunities that the alliances will bring for students in the future, already now, but more and more in the future. And I think that is something that national agencies can really help us with. Of course, we're within Aurora doing a lot of outreach to our own students. We've got a lot of student engagement even within the program, helping us develop our work. But the next step, I think, is really for the alliances to become something alive with the students rather than this policy thing they heard of, which is some universities do that. And what are we doing? Really, like, what are the opportunities for students? What can you do? What does it mean to be part of a European university? Why is that easier than your normal route? What more opportunities does it bring? How is that good for your personal development as a student? How does that bring you the skills and the mindset that you need when you're done as a graduate to go out in the world and get those jobs that you want? I think that translation from we are a pilot program and there is policy to be developed and we are working together as universities to, yes, but what does it mean for a student? I think that's really crucial, because only then will it come alive for students and will it spread more and will it become known and a normal part of the higher education landscape.
Thank you. Very wise words there. So looking at the final beneficiaries. And Jeroen.
I hope indeed that the current developments will urge national agencies to do something. Allow me at the same time to be a bit more negative about what is possible and what will happen. Bologna, 20 years ago, we already agreed that we should move forward. But in this respect, we have failed. We are not yet there. Not even close to initiatives, because there are these barriers where national agencies, ministries, quality assurance agencies play a major role. So again, I really hope that this is the momentum that brings about a change. But looking at the history, I'm sorry to close down on a somewhat negative view on this. But I'm sure that Vanessa will lift this up.
Thank you, Irina. I will try. I think the Erasmus Plus national agencies are a fantastic multiplier and support for the universities, not only to understand this initiative, but to learn from this initiative. And I think we all have, at all different levels, a key role to share. The alliances themselves, and it's part of your objectives as well, to disseminate Erasmus Plus national agencies, to share also between the universities in their countries that are in this initiative and those that are not, to share the experiences. So very interesting to do that at national level, and of course to do it at European level as well between the alliances. We are gathering regularly the alliances at rectors level, at coordinators level, to discuss many topics and to exchange practices. And I think the more we do, the better. There was this forum on the future of universities organized last week under the French presidency that allowed the alliances to exchange. Unfortunately, it could not be physical; otherwise, it would have been open to the wide public. But it was still possible to attend online. So yeah, I would say a lot to learn from and a lot to share at all different levels. And yes, we need as well the Erasmus Plus national agencies, and they have a key role on that as well. Yes.
Thank you so much to all of you. And I want to finish on this note on saying that life is all a big learning path and process. And I think this we need to keep in mind that hopefully there should be some kind of analytical reflection, not only a rush towards prestige in this alliance implementation. So really much more time for sharing experiences, good practice, and in all kinds of different workshops. And as you say, we all share this responsibility. So thank you for today. And now for this discussion, it will certainly continue in other fora. Now it's time for half an hour of coffee break. So thank you all.
Thank you.
Good afternoon and welcome back. Hope you enjoyed your coffee break. Thank you so much for attending today's panel on the Erasmus Plus Key Action 1 Learning Mobilities for Individuals. My name is Angeliki Psychogiou. I'm a Policy and Project Officer within the Academic Cooperation Association, and today I will be the moderator of this session. It's really a great pleasure to have you all here, and especially our distinguished speakers. But before I introduce them to you, I would like to give you some more information about the twofold objective of our panel. The first objective is to learn more about the 2022 novelties of the Key Action 1 of the Erasmus Plus program, both for the student and the staff mobility, with two presentations focusing on the European and international dimension of the action. The second aim is to illustrate the institutional perspective of Key Action 1 mobilities, focusing on the blended mobilities approach and providing some concrete examples from the use of the Key Action 1 funding line for this reason. To address these goals, I'm delighted to welcome our three distinguished speakers today, joining us both from the studio as well as online. Our first speaker is Johannes Geringer. He's here next to me. Johannes is a policy officer in the higher education unit of the DGEAC, and he has a long-standing experience in the EU education policies and the higher education programs. Within the higher education unit of the DGEAC, Johannes is working for the design and implementation of the Key Action 1, both student and staff mobility, as well as cooperation partnerships and European universities alliances. Welcome, Johannes. We're very glad to have you here with us.
Thank you.
Our second speaker joining us online is Antoaneta Irikova. She is a policy officer, hi Antoaneta, in the International Cooperation Unit of the DG EAC, and she is mainly working for Key Action 1 International Credit Mobility and for the promotion of the international dimension of the Erasmus program. She is also the Commission's liaison in the third phase of the Study in Europe project, and she oversees its implementation. Wonderful to see you, Antoaneta. A real pleasure to have you here with us today.
Thank you. Real pleasure to be in this event.
Last but certainly not least, our third speaker is Alicia Betts. She will join us as well online right about now. Yes. Hi, Alicia. She's responsible for international strategic projects in the University of Girona in Spain, and she's working mainly on university strategic partnerships, community engagement, and virtual exchange initiatives. She's also an elected member of the Cooperation for Development expert community of the European Association for International Education. Welcome as well, Alicia. Warm thanks for you being here with us.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, so before I give the floor to Johannes for his presentation, I want to invite the audience to raise your questions for the speaker in the Q&A box within the Hopin stage, as well as to use the chat for interactions between you. Also, for those of you who are active on Twitter, please don't forget to tweet by using the hashtag @whatsnew_2022. Our first presentation will be focusing on mobility activities among EU member states and third countries associated to the program, or else named Key Action 131. Johannes, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Angeliki. It's a pleasure to talk to you at this ACE event on higher education mobility, funded by the Erasmus program. I will give you, in a nutshell, what is new for the year 2022. Please.
You have your... Yes. Let me show you.
Thank you. Well, 2022 is there will be a double celebration. We will celebrate 35 years of the Erasmus program and the Erasmus Plus program and its predecessors. And at the same time, it will be the European Year of Youth, where mobility is also featuring prominently. Just recently, last month, we have published a higher education package that also includes very important aspects of mobility. We published a new strategy for universities, and together also a proposal for a council recommendation for more effective European transnational cooperation. And in terms of mobility, the Commission is stressing very much that we need more support for embedded mobility within transnational education programs. We need more international mobility to and from different countries in the world. We also have to improve the quality of traineeships, do much more to stimulate inclusive green and digital mobility, and eventually also one of the flagships of the European strategy for universities is the European Student Card Initiative to digitalize mobility management. So before we go into what is new in 2022, I'd like to give you a little recap on the past programming period, 2014 to 2020, for higher education mobility, that is within program countries. We were able to fund more than 2 million student mobilities, and almost 400,000 staff mobilities within these 7 years, while the two projects from the two last calls are still ongoing. And you can see there is, of course, a dip due to the pandemic in the last two calls. We had a strong increase of funds over the years, which not only resulted in higher mobility figures until 1819, but also a stronger increase in the grant levels for students, up to 30% over 5 years. Just a snapshot of what is the characteristic of a typical Erasmus student. Well, mostly female, at 61% of the Erasmus students. They go abroad for 5 months, long-term mobility as we call it. The average age is 22 and a half, and the monthly grant was on average about 375 €4. So when it comes to the new program, 2021 to 2027, the priorities in relation to higher education mobility are basically the horizontal priorities. The program should become more digital, more inclusive, more international, to reinforce the international dimension of the program. We also want to expand and create stronger links towards research and innovation. You know, the other important part of higher education institutions, what activities of higher education institutions. Eventually, the program should also become greener. What does it mean in terms of novelty for the higher education mobility action? What is now called under the acronym K131. We started last year with the first call, 2021. We will have the scheme, the classical Erasmus scheme, will become a worldwide mobility scheme and will be open for all students from the partner countries, program countries, from the EU and associated third countries, and all countries in the world can be mobility destinations now. We also took into account the digital transformation, and by integrating blended mobility, which are short physical stays abroad, and also as a counterpart, blended intensive programs. We will also boost the inclusiveness of mobility to cater to all kinds of people from different backgrounds. We will boost doctoral mobility, and eventually we support sustainable mobility formats as well. But this is the general feature. So what is new in K131 for the year 2022, where we are now? Well, first of all, the call 2021 resulted in 3,500 K131 projects being awarded grants. Most of the grant agreements have been signed. It was a transition year because we started late. But now for the call 2022 that will be concluded for mobility this month, we hopefully achieved a cruising speed. We will start like always, on the 1st of June with the mobility action. But this time there will be two international mobility strands. I will talk about the international mobility strand of K131. My colleague Antonetta will talk about 171, which is also used to be called ICM. The buzzword for call 2022, the second call, is stability. We will only basically allow the integration of participants coming from the ICM that take part in the blend intensive programs. And we also worked on better funding accompanying persons through staff rates. In terms of funding, there will be lots of funds in the future, or for the call 2022, we will exceed the level of funding we have available for higher education mobility K131 that we had at the last year of the previous programming period. So there will be €1 billion available for mobility of students and staff. While in call 2021, we only had about 700, a little bit more than 720, because it was the first year, and some national agencies also decided to shift some funds from other sectors. And out of this, up to 20% can be used for international mobility. So in call 2022, the maximum will be 200 million available for international mobility of students and staff. Just to recap, international, or what I call worldwide mobility, the added value that we see in the international opening of K131 is that we will kind of close a funding gap because the focus is on students, outgoing students from Europe to the other regions in the world, for all students of all study cycles. And well, up to 20% of the last awarded budget of that higher education institutions get can be used for it. K131 is quite flexible in the use. Funds can be used, well, totally for intra-European mobility, or as I said, maximum 20% for outgoing. We aligned with K171 in terms of funding rates, but also eligibility rules to ensure complementarity in case higher education institutions want to fund their exchange with their partners worldwide through both funding systems. We would like to see a diversification of geographic locations, the countries where higher education institutions send their students and stuff. And there will be a change of terminology as well, but you can check it in the program guide. The other novelty is that we introduce blended mobility. This is especially a novelty for students because students can now go abroad for a short physical stay complemented with virtual component, either individually to study or as a group. And we offer as a model the blended intensive program, but can be other blended short-term courses. Traineeships can also be organized in a blended way this way. And staff mobility can be also organized in the blended format, either for teaching or staff training. And staff can also take part in blended intensive programs, kind of staff training weeks. On blended intensive programs, I just want to say it was a good success during the first call. We hopefully have 2,500 blended intensive programs in about a third of the funded projects. And this may at least generate like 37,000 blended mobilities for students and staff. We would like to boost innovative teaching, learning and training, address the priorities of the program, stimulate more transdisciplinary approach and research and challenge-based approaches as well, and create eventually more blended mobility opportunities to get this new possibility off the ground. The target groups are the students, but also staff learners, staff that is on training, can be academic staff or any other stuff. Yes, I mentioned that we would like to also have a wider range of diverse backgrounds participating in student staff mobility. We have a strategy at the European level to boost inclusion and diversity. What we do in terms of program design, we will provide more funding to enable people to overcome barriers, but we will also included these flexible mobility formats, shorter study stays, like long-term mobility can be from 2 months on, and then the blended short-term mobilities that are sketched out. So that's just in a nutshell. In terms of doctoral mobility, since we wanted to give a boost also to more cooperation with the area of research, we now allow doctoral candidates to go for short-term physical mobility as well, independently of the status, if they are staff teaching at higher education institutions or just being students. And long-term mobility for students that are doctoral candidates will also continue. Here, I just want to say that the focus on doctoral mobility should be on education and training, can be including the thesis, PhD thesis. A last word on the European Student Card Initiative, one of the flagship initiatives of our higher education strategy that we've also just published. Is and there are some key messages that I'd like to pass on in this during this event, because they concern especially the year 2022. First of all, we set out the digitalization of mobility management in the Erasmus Charter for higher education as one of the requirements, and as a counterpart, higher education institutions also get a higher organizational support per mobility. Well, first of all, interinstitutional agreements need to be signed in a digital format by the end of the calendar year 2022. And when it comes to learning agreements for study mobility, they also have to become digital for the academic year 2022-2023. One of the features of the European Student Card Initiative is that the Erasmus Without Paper network, and to help higher education institutions to connect to this network, we will have set up a new help desk. There will also be a new governance structure in place involving all stakeholders, national agencies, higher education institutions, and other representatives of the sector to better guide, counsel the Commission in this area. And there will also be much more communication as from this year on. When it comes to Erasmus Plus mobile app, there will be a major event at the end of March for higher education institutions and student organizations to show how best to use the app for the students. And eventually, when it comes to the virtual European student card, which is also featuring prominently as one of the pillars of the student card initiative, is that there will be a wave of onboarding that is starting this fall. So this brings me to the end of my presentation, and I pass on the word to Angeliki. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Johannes. It was very interesting to hear about the blended intensive programs as well as about the Erasmus Going digital updates. Moving on, our second presentation will be from Antoaneta Irikova, where she will focus on the international mobility involving third countries not associated to the program, supported both by part internal and mainly external funds, policy funds. Or else named Key Action 171. Antoaneta, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Yes. Yes, thank you, Angeliki. So I will be presenting you I'll give you an overview of the achievements of the ICM during the previous program period, and then with those slides, we'll walk through the main novelties of the action. I just want to start with a few words on just the international dimension of Erasmus Plus in general, because you know that the program has a strong international dimension, that it's offering a wide range of opportunities for participants, that it also includes earmarked funding from external financing instruments, and 2022 this year 2022 is quite important for us because as of this call, all international actions will come on stream, including ICM. And we had a gap year, which was due to the delay in the adoption of the legal basis. And so maybe I can just start from a bit afar, saying a few words about the funding of this international dimension. So the international actions are funded by a mix of Erasmus Plus budget line or heading 2 and the external financing instruments of the EU budget or heading 6. And heading 6 funding will amount to around 2.2 billion for this program period, and you see that there is a slight increase in comparison to the previous 2014-2020 period. So this heading 6 will come from two financing instruments, namely the instrument for pre-accession 3, IPA 3, which will be which covers the Western Balkans, and the other big instrument that merged four instruments that we had in the past. It's called Neighborhood Development and International Cooperation Instrument, and it will cover the rest of the world. What's important to be said here is as you can see on the graph at the right-hand side, that the greater part of this heading will support actions in the field of higher education, and ICM has a quite substantial budget, also amounts to half of the budget that's coming from heading 6. So a novelty in this program period is we have a slight difference in the composition of the regions. This is quite important because it has implications on the implementation of the action, but I will come later on and explain what and the new budget, the new region breakdown. So this is just what we have achieved in retrospective. So in the past. Program period, around 270,000 short-term mobilities were awarded for staff and students in all study cycles between what we previously called program and partner countries. And you can see that there is a difference between the shares, the volume of mobilities for different regions in the world, and that's due to the available budget and to the EU external priorities. So the ratio that we had from incoming outgoing students, it's if I'm not mistaken 62% incoming and 38% outgoing. And in terms of the student staff mobilities, we have 56% staff and 44% student mobilities. Just going briefly through the lessons learned, because that's what because they're also addressed in when we were designing the new ICM actions. So what we had was like a high demand for funding and an oversubscription in most regions of the world, despite the complex application regime. You know that the ICM budget is is split into regional envelopes, and yeah, which represents a quite rigid budget structure, and and we had quite inflexible management of the funds, which proved to be a barrier to budget absorption. Um, but also in the beginning, the budget consumption reflected the national strategic preferences of the European higher education institutions, but that changed over time, and we saw a greater diversification of partner countries. Um, Partner countries universities towards the end of the program period, and also yeah, leading to a more geographically balanced way of using the funds. And also we achieved a better inclusion of least developed and low income countries, in particular into regions of the world, Asia and Latin America. And maybe lastly, not to omit the outcomes of the effect of the COVID-19 pandemic. It has hit severely the international mobilities, and we're monitoring closely the budget take up and the realization rate of mobilities. So what do we have as ICM budget for this program period? Yes, I see that yeah, my some of the titles are not in the don't fit, but okay. So we have a slight increase of the total budget for ICM, which will amount to 1.064 billion. And as I said here on the right graph, you can see the new region breakdown. So we have new Africa, Caribbean, and Pacific region. It's split into Sub-Sahara Africa, Pacific, and the Caribbean, which will have dedicated budgets. And also there is a huge increase in this budget line for Sub-Saharan Africa, and also we'll have an increase in the budget for the Western Balkans. In terms of budget for 2022, we'll have 194 million euros, and this will be more or less a flat budget, and it will not increase dramatically over the years. So here I don't want to go much into details, but like when we were designing the new ICM action, the focus was put on simplification, and we now introduced a new regional approach in the application form, meaning that the applicants will not have to reply to a quality questions for each country that they intend to cooperate with, but now they will do so for the different regions. Also, in terms of simplification, we're and more flexible use of funds. We're allowing for shift funds between countries in the same region, which we think it will lead to a more flexible budget management. And also already at application, we're asking the applicants to do an estimation of participants with fewer opportunities, because we want to incentivize them already to think in this direction when they initiate the projects. Here, I don't want to go also into much detail, because Johannes had already addressed most of those novelties, because the activities supported are common to both strands, and ICM participants will be could participate in blended mobilities, including in BIPs, which are funded by Key Action 131. It's important that the external financing instruments, they will not fund the design of BIPs itself, but the participants of 171 will be able to take part in those. Also, we're opening up to recent graduates for traineeships, and as Johannes said, we're trying to to provide a more flexible format for doctoral candidates and to better meet their diverse learning and training needs, because you know, in some countries they are considered staff and in some others as students. So we want to allow them to have equal opportunities. And also, Johannes, as Johannes briefly outlined, that will provide also financial incentives for participants with fewer opportunities and that come from diverse backgrounds. And that will be done through specific unit costs or through real costs. So, and maybe lastly on ICM, just to outline some of the specificities of the action, namely that on program level, we have set priorities and indicative geographical targets for different regions of the world, and they need to be attained at European level over the whole duration of the program. That does not mean that every single higher education institutions need to meet those. It means that the NAs will take those into account when they allocate the available funds. This is not something completely new to this program, because we did have geographical targets in the past, and now they concern the participation of participants with fewer opportunities in some region, and also to the maximum percentage of participation of higher education institutions from for given countries or in the world. Also, something specific on ICM is the restrictions that we'll have for outgoing short first and second cycle students. This affects most of the countries in almost all regions that are covered by the INDICI instrument, and Western Balkans countries. They are on this OECD ODA list, which is the list where you can see which countries can receive official development assistance. The Western Balkans countries are included in this list, but they are exempted from this rule. So mobilities in both direction, regardless of the student mobilities in both directions, regardless of the study cycle, will be could be organized towards the Western Balkans region. Here I will see that the time is advancing. I don't want to eat up other people's time. That's it. That's just a comparative table for the two strands of international higher education mobility. But the message that we want to pass on here is that the higher education institutions could think how to use the funds from both strands in a strategic way and in strategic and like complementary way. And very briefly, since we're on the topic of Key Action 1, I just wanted to mention also the virtual exchanges in higher education in youth, which is now a full-fledged action under Key Action 1. There is a rich policy context behind this behind this action, the intention to boost to have the Erasmus a more international Erasmus plus, the geopolitical dimension of the European education area, the and the outward also strand of the digital education action plan, and also the EU youth strategy 2019-2027. And just a word that there was a pilot project that ran for 3 years from 2018 and 2020, which was focusing on the South Med. And as I said, now we're incorporating this action into Erasmus Plus. There are two calls. Call 2021, which is outside of the program guide, and Call 2022, which is embedded. So now we're expanding the regional coverage, and the action will also cover the Western Balkan region, the Eastern Partnership, Russia, South Med, and Sub-Saharan Africa. And rushed a bit through the slides, but that's more or less from my side.
Thank you so much, Antoinetta. Thank you for all these updates about ICM. Me, myself, having worked as a manager of ICM mobilities, I'm quite happy to see the direction Key Action 171 is taking and how the Erasmus program is becoming more international. I'm sure we'll have many questions, both for you and Johannes. But now let's move on to our final and third and final speaker for this panel. That will bring forth the institutional perspective with some concrete examples of blended mobilities initiatives using the funding line. Alicia, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Angeliki. Thank you for having me today, and it's a pleasure to be here with all of you. As you just mentioned, I was asked to speak about blended mobility from a practical perspective, and share some examples of how blended mobility is translated into practice in my institution, the Universitat de Girona. I would like to say that I prepared this presentation together with my colleague and the head of the international office, Laura Ripoll. She's also present, albeit behind the scenes, and is happy to answer any questions via the chat at any time. Okay, just to be on the same page, this is what we understand by blended mobility and by virtual component. Since I know that the audience is well versed and we've already been talking about this topic, I will not develop this any further. I just wanted to make sure we were all on the same page. So, our experience and approach to blended mobility is defined by the context and the way our institution as a live organization works. At the University of Girona, we have been traditionally good at organizing and delivering intensive programs. And we see that this expertise shows in the way that blended mobility is taking place so far at our institution. So our approach is to keep it simple. Blended mobility is not new. For those that have been around for a while, it resembles a lot the intensive programs, but with a more structured virtual component, which is something that COVID has greatly facilitated because it's pushed us to gain digital skills in this way. Another thing that we've done is we've empowered faculties. So we have given our faculties and centers general guidelines, but also the freedom to decide how they want to organize their initiatives, and funding permitting as many as they want. And in this sense, we will include improvements year by year as experience in the faculties grow. There is quite a lot of room for creativity within blended mobility, which makes it exciting, and of course, within the rules of the funding and reporting. So we see some existing activities benefiting from the current funding, but we also, with some minor adaptations, and we also see some new initiatives arising as a response to the call. The virtual component of these blended mobilities can and does, in our case, feed on the learnings of virtual exchange and COIL, which was just being mentioned. At UDG, we have a strong community of practice on virtual exchange. Since the COVID outbreak, UDG shifted some of its internationalization priorities towards introducing virtual exchange as a means to provide our students with diverse and inclusive pathways for acquiring intercultural competencies. We now have a community of around 30 academics from all disciplines that are introducing and working on introducing virtual exchange into their courses and learning from each other's experiences. This community of practice, or we call it the Teaching Innovation Network, complements and is often involved in the design of these blended initiatives. Okay, sorry. I will now share 4 examples of blended mobility programs that we have running or in preparation this academic year. So we see the first 2 that I'm going to share are programs that already existed well before this current funding opportunity, and that have adapted to the funding criteria. So Euro Week, this is an example from the Faculty of Economics. and it's been running for over 25 years. It's a long-standing and regular activity of the faculty. So Euro Week is an annual event organized by Prime Networking, a European network of 17 universities. It's a one-week academic gathering that gathers students and academics from member universities. And in this case, the virtual component, which existed already prior to the current funding options, is made up by the students working in small international teams cooperating to develop a research project during the months before the Euro Week event. And then during the conference week, the teams present the results of their research projects and attend other workshops, and they can even win prizes for it. The second case that I would like to share with you today is the International University Week. This has also been running for several years, and it's an event organized by the network, SOCNet, so for social workers. They organize 4 simultaneous international university weeks in 4 universities, and where students are mixed, so all groups have an international dimension. The virtual component in this case are a set of preparatory sessions on the topic that they will be working on during the physical meeting, and a final virtual session to reflect on the learnings and the experiences together. Sorry. The next examples that I have are a bit different in nature. So the first one is blended mobility linked to a practicum or an integrated traineeship. So in this case, it's coming from the Faculty of Education and Psychology. So students from the Faculty of Education from UK and from the University of Girona, they were doing an internship in schools. And that was the physical part. And they shared together in groups their experiences, so that the virtual component had an international comparative approach. They shared the systems, the learnings, the challenges, while they participated in their own training, in their own systems. And last but not least, I'd like to share a new initiative that has been created in response to this current funding opportunity. In this case, it's a summer school where students will be introduced to interaction design and research and apply it to a specific project. And the summer school consists of 3 phases. The first is a cycle of 3 online sessions where the basic concepts are introduced and some basic exercises for the students to get to know each other. The second is a 1-week in-person workshop in Girona, where students work in group projects. And the third is a wrap-up online session where they will reflect on the learnings and the experience that they lived. So what can we say about blended mobility from our experience so far at the University of Girona? The initiatives are mainly blended intensive programs with European partners. So we have yet to see blended mobility initiatives or traineeships. We see that at the moment, most of the proposals are coming from existing initiatives that are adapting to the funding criteria, so just adding the missing element. But we hope to see a more integrated learning approach where we see the physical and the virtual components thought already from the beginning. We see that accreditation and recognition is done usually in optional courses, so they're not part of regular study programs. And we'd also like to stress the fact that we really need to keep a close watch on inclusion to ensure that all the students can have access and participate in these type of programs. At the same time, these international blended learning experiences allow our university or universities to offer a wider variety of international experiences for our students, and many of which will not enjoy a physical long-term mobility for diverse reasons. At UDG, we have created a specific recognition for students with intercultural competencies that appears in their diploma supplement. So these type of initiatives, these type of short-term blended options are very welcome. So they have a wider range of international experiences that they can add points to. Finally, we are going to monitor the deployment of this initiative to see where there is room for improvement, because we're just at the beginning of this period. And I would like to end my presentation by sharing with you the Frames project, which UDG is a member of. This project, entitled Fostering Resilience Through Accredited Mobility for European Higher Education Innovation, so Frames for short, is coordinated by the UNIMED network. And it has helped us make sense of all the different ways in which virtual exchange takes place. And since virtual exchange is often the new element added to blended mobility practices, I thought that the work done within this project would be useful for the audience. So the first output of this project was an analysis of case studies of virtual exchange with and without blended mobility, with a goal to find scenarios which can help us understand how virtual exchange is translated into practice. And in the slide here, you can see the link to the report. I'll post it later in the chat as well. And you can see the ones that are marked in black are the ones that have blended mobility elements to them. So I'm not going to go deep into them. I'll just mention these two first ones for the sake of time. So the first scenario is virtual exchange as a preparatory or follow-up activity to physical mobility. These are courses that institutions organize before and after a mobility period for students in order to empower them for a better international experience, as well as ensuring the integration of the intercultural learnings with a reflection on the experience. We don't have any of these examples at the University of Girona, but one of our partner institutions in the Frames project, the University of Limerick, has created one of these programs. The second one is virtual exchange as an intertwined component of physical mobility, probably the most common one. This would align perfectly with the funding available for blended mobility under the Erasmus Plus program. And the study concludes that there is ample room for creativity still, and that, for instance, virtual and blended placements and traineeships are yet to be explored. Also, blended mobility for PhD students. And that's all from my side for now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alicia. It was certainly inspiring to hear about all these practical examples from the University of Girona. Mindful, though, of the time and the limited time we have for the remaining part of this panel for questions, I suggest we dive in directly. The first question is a question aimed to Antoanetta. The budget increase for the SSA region is significant. What advice would you give to higher education institutions and national agencies to make sure to take up of the funds, making the most of the geographical priority, of this specific geographical priority?
Yes, thank you. No, this is a very pertinent question, because we heard a lot of concerns from the side of NAs, because it's really a significant increase of the budget. But as I said in the previous program, I'll just make a parallel with the previous program, because in the beginning, universities from program countries were cooperating mainly with their traditional partners, but towards the end of the program, we really achieved a better diversification of higher education institutions in different countries of the world, and also that was a work in progress, and also the different NAs usually set developed out different strategies how to approach different stakeholders in some regions in order to achieve in order to increase the interest towards this region. So it's a matter really of also good promotion, and the results will not come immediately, but we think that yes, we could achieve a good budget absorption in the region in the years to come. And in a way, in this first call, we'll assess, we'll see the interest and the appetite for this region, and then we'll see whether any adjustment could be done. But yes, but on a positive note, uh, in a lot of program countries, there is interest towards this region. So
That's great. Thanks. Now our second questions. I'm sorry I'm going that fast, but because of our limited time, it would be good to address as much as possible questions. Our second question is for Johannes, and it's about the Erasmus going digital situation. There seems to be a lot of concern about very tight deadlines, and there seems to be some issues with the Erasmus without paper networks of not working properly. Could you comment on this?
Well, thank you for the question. We've been taking into account, of course, the needs for the higher education sector. We're listening to our stakeholders, higher education institutions, and we have also adapted to the time schedule for the rollout of the European Student Card Initiative. And adapted. We give the higher education institutions more time actually to implement the new tools, the linking, connecting to the EWP network, and also the use of the digital interinstitutional agreement manager and online learning agreement tool. That's why we also set up a new help desk to help higher education institutions, and also will have a government structure for this initiative so that we get feedback from the ground directly and adapt as much as possible, and also see what the concrete needs are on the ground. But I think it's in the benefit of everybody that all higher education institutions get connected and are able to exchange data on student mobilities, the interinstitutional agreements, because it only works if the partner on the other side also has a connection to the EWP network, so that the interinstitutional agreements and learning agreements and many other elements of mobility and management can be exchanged in the future.
That's great. Thank you very much, Johannes. A second question is also about you, but maybe Antoinetta can contribute if there is a need. It's about the 20% rule of reallocation of internal policy funds to the key action 171 mobilities. Are there any limitation on top of this?
Well, as I said before, the limitation is the maximum 20% of the latest awarded grant for the K131 budget. And that means that a fifth of the whole budget can be used. That means higher education institutions have to be aware that when they spend a certain amount of money for intra-European mobility, they can also afford to spend money on intra-European international mobility. So since this is not a fixed amount, it's rather well related to the amount that will be the final amount awarded to the project. One has to look at the whole take-up of mobility. I know it's very difficult in the current situation of the pandemic, but we hope that higher education institutions, you will really be able to send out students and staff on international mobility. I think many countries now open, like for example, it's now possible to go to the United States. So we invite really higher education institutions to take up the opportunities, not only in the future under Call 2022, but already Call 2021. All the novelties that we are included in the new program.
Thank you so much, Johannes. Another question comes for Alicia. And could you discuss and give us some more information about the digital infrastructure for the delivery of the programs that you previously mentioned? Do you get any national support for these? Are you using internal funds or basically the Erasmus funds? What is happening in the University of Girona?
Okay, this is a question that maybe my colleague Laura can also support me in answering in the chat. As far as I know, there is no support for the digital side. So yes, there are general infrastructures in the universities, but there's none extra provided so far. And it is a topic that needs to be taken into account because, just as an example, students need quiet spaces with good access to internet and computers or other devices where they can connect from, and that isn't always easy to find on campuses. So this is something that has to be taken into account and that we as an institution also have to look into.
Thank you so much. Now I have one general question for all of you, actually, if you could briefly comment. In line with the strategic priorities of the Digital Education Action Plan, we know that the Erasmus program aims to support the digital transformation of education and training. We know that the measures supporting blended mobilities will be available throughout the Erasmus program and throughout the whole period. Could you share with us some information on the core values of blended mobilities, though? What I mean, we know that the health crisis has brought forward the need to actually engage in an immediate fashion for these opportunities. But it's also important to identify the added value of them compared to physical mobility, or more appropriately, the benefit of the complementarity aspect. How to convince institutions, maybe the commission people can reply on this, or students most primarily to get involved with these new mobility formats. And Alicia, maybe you could bring the student perspective in this. Would you like to start, Johannes?
Yes, thank you. We see a number of benefits while we introduced blended mobility, especially blended mobility for students. That is, first, we'd like to stimulate more innovative learning and teaching formats. We also would like to provide more flexible mobility formats. For example, that students are independent of the academic calendar. Also, we would like to boost inclusion. That means certain categories of students have difficulties going abroad for long-term mobility, like 2 or 3 or 4 months. For example, students with children or working students. So it's also a possibility for them to take part. And eventually, we also want to boost digital education and also digital skills, both for students and teachers to use virtual communication, because that's also a reality in their later work life. So they can already prepare to work this way together across boundaries, across cultures, and the virtual components, as it was also mentioned by Alicia Betts, also helps to prepare, also helps to build confidence, also prepare for intercultural sensitivities, but also do a follow-up and not let it finish when people just leave when they're abroad.
Thank you so much. Antoinetta, would you like to contribute something?
Yeah, maybe just a few words, but in general, I would echo what Johannes just said. But also the digital transformation of education and training was already high on the political agenda when COVID-19 hit. So yeah, in a way, the pandemic just cast a spotlight on its importance. And as your question was about the core value of blended mobility, I would say that yes, this is a more flexible format, and that the with introducing this, we would like to enable a broader base of participants to take part in our actions, and including those that are facing barriers, and those that have some other sort of obligations, being family or professional, also facing financial barriers, or so all these people that could not otherwise go on a long-term mobility. And yes, and just to stress that the blended and the virtual component of this blended, we should consider it as an enhancement, but not as a replacement of the physical mobility, because people usually have also this concern that that virtual will replace physical, but no, here we have both in the format of blended. So
Exactly.
yeah.
Alicia?
Okay. Apart, I won't go into the inclusion aspects because they've already been mentioned. But I would say that from a student's perspective, you're actually giving them the opportunity to have a wider variety of international and intercultural experiences. And as we see the world today, we have some people physically in Brussels and some of us connecting remotely. This is going to be probably the future. So any type of blended mobility and getting used to these digital communications and online settings is also a plus for students to gain intercultural and international competencies to relate to other people. I'd also consider the idea of the internationalization of the curricula. So it's also a way to bring in to current courses an international dimension that might otherwise be not possible. And in our institution, sorry, I wanted to mention another thing before, the reflection aspect of the virtual component, what you were both mentioning a second ago about how important it is to integrate the intercultural competencies. And this can also be done with a follow-up virtual reflection on the physical experience, whereby which you integrate all these competencies as well. So despite there are some important issues that need to be taken into account, as access to computers and to good Wi-Fi networks and so forth, we think that it's a very positive opportunity for students.
Thank you so much, Alicia. I'm afraid our time is over. I would like to warmly thank all of you again for joining us from home, as well as our three speakers, for the insightful presentations and their availability to answer the questions from the audience. Wrapping up the day, one of the things that I would like to say is that it was a very inspiring day with a lot of reflection and discussions about the European strategy for universities, as well as the European Universities Initiative, closing with a more practical approach in the Key Action 1 mobilities. A short reminder for our participants is that, before I close our session, is that following this panel, there is a networking opportunity in the Hopin platform under the networking tab that you can find on the left of your screen. Join this tab and you will be automatically connected through the platform to another participant for a couple of minutes in order to exchange. We will see you tomorrow for day 2 of the What's New in Brussels seminar at 9:30 sharp, starting with a panel on all-inclusive mobility. Have a great day, everyone, and take care. Bye-bye.